Last time on Witness Titanic, I asked how well you knew the story of Herbert Pitman, if you knew where he was during the collision, what boat he escaped in, or if you had previously known even a single anecdote involving the third officer. And I asked a question I had to ask myself before beginning research for these episodes. Why is Pitman the unsung, uncredited officer? Well, we did as we always do on Witness Titanic, and we let the witness speak for himself. He was sleeping at the time of the collision. He was put in charge of lifeboat number 5. His most impactful anecdote of the overall Titanic story, so far at least, was Officer Murdoch saying, "Goodbye, good luck." An incredible moment of two humans experiencing the same conversation, with one thinking he'll be back by morning, the other thinking he won't live to see the morning. If that is not a Titanic moment, I do not know what is. But thanks to that moment and the rest of his testimony, we're starting to understand why he is the unsung, uncredited officer. If he leaves Titanic in lifeboat number 5, he's the first officer to abandon ship. He's off the deck by 12:43, not even halfway through the sinking. There are passengers on Titanic still sleeping in their staterooms, and Pitman is going by outside their porthole in a lowering lifeboat. Perhaps his story isn't told because there wasn't enough time for there to be one. Today on Witness Titanic, we continue our questioning. We talk with Pitman about loading and lowering lifeboat number 5, his journey in the open ocean as Titanic sinks directly in front of him, and his emotional and troubling experiences that follow. Folks, welcome back to the pod. Welcome back to the Pitman testimony. So excited to bring you the exciting conclusion of his story, especially because I did make a pretty huge mistake in part 1 that I'd like to rectify here. I will say I made a mistake, but it did prove my point. I showed an image in the video, and I put an image on Instagram of what I identified as the only time that Officer Pitman appears in the 1997 movie, and it was a shot of, I believe, the iceberg collision on the bridge, and people rightfully pointed out that that's actually Fourth Officer Boxall, which is probably the second least featured officer, or third behind Wilde, probably. But anyway, that was the wrong officer, so I will put on screen right now, and I'll also put this image on Instagram, of course, of the now correctly identified third officer Pitman. His only real moment in the movie is he's the officer standing closest to Captain Smith when they are singing in the church service on Sunday morning. So that is third officer Pitman, the uncredited officer in the 1997 film. So yes, mistake by me, but absolutely proved my point that he's so uncredited, he's so unremarkable in this movie that even I misidentified him when I was trying to give him credit. Now that's plenty of setup. Let's get back into Herbert Pitman's testimony. To start us off, we will actually back up a bit from where we ended our last episode. We return to around 12:10 a.m. So this is just after Pitman had investigated below decks, and he returned to assist in prepping the boats for loading and lowering. It's about that time when Pitman runs into an old friend of the pod.
In the act of clearing away this boat, a man said to me, that was dressed in a dressing gown with slippers on, he said to me very quietly, "There is no time to waste." I thought he did not know anything about it at all, so we carried on our work in the usual way.
Do you know who that man was?
I did not then.
Do you now?
I do now.
Who was it?
Mr. Ismay. I did not know who it was then. I had never seen the man in my life before.
And did you leave Mr. Ismay on the deck when you were lowered?
Mr. Ismay was on the deck when I was lowered, yes. The next I saw of him, he was coming on to the Carpathia.
Bruce Ismay makes an appearance here in episode 38. Bruce goes up to the third officer and says, "There is no time to waste." Clearly, he has recently heard from Captain Smith, or maybe Thomas Andrews, that it is a mathematical certainty that Titanic will be on the bottom of the ocean in about an hour or two. But I should point out, this is not the time that Bruce attempts to rush an officer, the one that appears in A Night to Remember, both the book and the film. More on that moment in the testimony of 5th Officer Lowe, sometime in Season 5, I assume. Something I would like to point out as your resident Ismay apologist. Bruce is always depicted as being on the bridge during the voyage, hounding the captain and the officers, telling them what to do, etc. But Bruce tells us that he was never on the bridge until after the collision. He told us that back in episodes 2 and 3. Who do we believe? Well, here is Officer Pitman, who worked 4 hours on, 4 hours off. He spent 50% of the voyage on and around the bridge, and he says that he had never seen the man in his life. Could Pitman be lying? Of course. Could Bruce have cornered Pitman on the Carpathia and said, whatever you do, don't you dare tell anybody that I was on the bridge? Yeah, I guess he could have done that. Could Bruce have done that for every single surviving deck crew member? I guess. And could they all have agreed to it and never admitted the truth for the rest of their lives? Sure. But for me, it's a little more likely that he just wasn't on the bridge, and Pitman is confirming that here. Moving on. So Pitman and some of the crew have swung out the boats as ordered by the captain. But swinging out the boats and lowering them are very different in terms of seriousness. Loading them means you intend to put people in the ocean. You are willing to dangle a group of millionaires 70 feet above the ocean. That is a serious step to take. So the crew had no problem swinging these boats out, but getting the order to load, we'll see about that. You lowered her level with the rail of the boat deck.
Of the boat deck, yes. Then this man in the dressing gown said we had better get her loaded with women and children. So I said, I await the commander's orders, to which he replied, very well, or something like that. It then dawned on me that it might be Mr. Ismay, judging by the description I had given me. So I went along to the bridge and saw Captain Smith, and I told him that I thought it was Mr. Ismay that wished me to get the boat away, with women and children in it. So he said, go ahead, carry on. I came along and brought in my boat. I stood on it and said, come along, ladies. There was a big crowd. Mr. Ismay helped to get them along, assisted in every way. We got the boat nearly full, and I shouted out for any more ladies.
You shouted?
I shouted. None were to be seen. So I allowed a few men to get into it. Then I jumped on the ship again. So Murdoch said, you go in charge of this boat.
And so we have reached where we left off last episode. This is where the two officers parted ways, and Murdoch says, goodbye, good luck. Resident Ismay apologist here one more time. I just have to point these things out. They're fascinating and so upsetting that these things aren't more widely recognized. So to anybody out there who somehow listens to this podcast and still can argue that Bruce should not have gotten into Lifeboat C with minutes left in the sinking, the coward, how dare he take that spot? Well, like Collapsible C, Lifeboat 5 was also overseen. The loading was also overseen by Murdoch. And as Pitman just told us, like Collapsible C, there were no more women around to board. Like Collapsible C, male passengers were given permission to enter the boat. But in this case, Ismay stays behind on a ship that he knows is going down. He's one of the only people on deck who knows the ship is going down. If Bruce was such a coward, why didn't he get into Lifeboat 5, or Lifeboat 7, or 3, or 1, or 15, or 13, or 11, or 9? I think I've made my point. Moving on. Back in episodes 5 and 6 of Witness Titanic, the Lightoller episodes, we spent a lot of time discussing with Lightoller how many people he was willing to put in each lifeboat before he lowered. He was very adamant about only putting in 2 crewmen to row and no other men, and he often stopped loading once about 20 to 25 total individuals were on board, or 1/3 of the capacity of the boat. Pitman only loaded 1 boat. It was loaded under the direction of Officer Murdoch, and it went out before any of Lightoller's, but let's compare. Were the passengers reluctant to get into this boat?
Oh no, I filled my boat fairly easily.
How many? Just go right ahead.
About 40.
How many men and how many women? Just tell it in your own way.
I should say about half a dozen men there. There would not have been so many men there had there been any women around, but there were none.
Did you have any direction over the number of people who were put into that lifeboat?
Well, not at the end I did not, because Mr. Murdoch was there, and he was the senior officer. It was for him to decide.
Mr. Lightoller, who had charge of the loading of the boats on the port side, has said that he put only 2 of the crew into the boats he loaded. How did it happen that you had so many of the crew?
I thought I only had 4 at the time.
Officers or common sailors or what? Can you give their names?
There were 1 sailor, 2 firemen, 2 stewards, and myself. No, I have not got their names.
Pitman may not have their names, but we might. We can't know 100%, but some of the crew believed to be on board Lifeboat 5 were Quartermaster Oliver, Fireman Shears, Boot Steward Elgar, another fireman, and Steward Henry Etches. Speaking of, one of the most important survivors in Lifeboat 5 is not a person at all, but a story. Henry Etches' story of seeing first-class passenger Benjamin Guggenheim dressing in his best, prepared to go down as a gentleman. That story escaped the ship in this lifeboat in Henry's memory. It's one of Titanic's most heroic stories, but it is because it survived in Lifeboat 5, we know it took place before that lifeboat was launched, 1243. So, Guggenheim, dressed in his best to go down as a gentleman, around 12:30 at the latest, so not quite as it is usually depicted, a more heroic time like 1:45 in the morning. Witness Titanic, ruining your favorite Titanic stories since 2024. We talked back in Season 1 about the rarely considered lowering capacity. Yes, a majority of these lifeboats held 65 people in the water, but they ended up getting launched from Titanic with half that, a quarter of that. But this inquiry likes to put a little more emphasis on lowering capacity. This is not an official rating. The lifeboat builder wasn't thinking about this when he built the boats. They didn't write it down on a piece of paper anywhere. You might as well call it officer courage, because that's really all it is. How many people does each individual officer feel comfortable hanging above the ocean in a wooden boat? Lightoller sort of opened our eyes to this concept, saying about 20 to 25 could be lowered safely at once. Pitman just told us that his boat was lowered with 40, so that gives us Murdoch's lowering capacity, you could kind of put together. But what does Pitman think of all this? How many men does it take to lower that boat?
2 men.
What is the distance the boat has to go to get to the water?
Well, we had to go 70 feet.
Do I correctly understand you to say that you would not consider it safe to load a boat to its full capacity at the rail before lowering it?
No, I do not think it would be wise to do it. I would not like to fill a lifeboat with 60 people and lower it suspended at both ends.
Suppose the boat carries 65 people. How many would you feel it's safe to put into the boat before lowering it?
That would depend a lot on the condition of the boat, whether it was an old boat or a new boat.
Well, I'm taking conditions as they were that night and those people.
I think 40 would be a very safe load. I do not think boats are ever intended to be filled from the rail.
How do you expect to fill them?
With a side ladder.
Why was not that course pursued in this instance?
Well, it was a new ship, and everything new, of course. It takes a certain amount of risk. That was a much quicker way, too.
Which is the much quicker way?
The way we did it.
So here we have our second of 4 surviving officers confirming that lowering these boats with empty seats was to be expected, not some proof that these officers were historically careless, which I am afraid they are far too often thought of that way. Pitman actually takes it further than Lightoller, explaining that loading the boats from the boat deck wasn't even the ideal way to do this. He suggests elsewhere in his testimony that passengers could have gathered on sea deck and climbed down a side ladder into a boat already on the surface, but they did it the quickest way. So was this the right call? Well, at some point between the US and UK inquiries, he seems to take a slightly different view of all this. In the US, he agrees with Lightoller and explains that you shouldn't load these boats too much at the boat deck. The strength of the tackle was in some question. But by the time he joins the Wreck Commissioner's Court in the UK, he seems to have second thoughts. Do you consider that the system of launching boats from davits so high above the water, as the davits necessarily must have been on a vessel of the size of Titanic, is a safe operation?
Apparently so. It was that night.
And you know what? He was kind of right. 18 boats were lowered by the davits, all of them from the boat deck or A deck. One was even lowered at full capacity, and all 18 boats reached the water safely, though some had some struggles on the way. So while we can give the officers some grace and allow them to follow their own lowering capacity, we can also be critical that their lack of confidence in the lifeboat equipment, maybe their lack of training with it, resulted in 20 boats in the water with about 400 empty seats among them.
We then cast the boat off and pulled away some safe distance from the ship. It was not for an hour that I realized she would go. An hour after we got into the water. I quite thought we would have to return to the ship again, perhaps at daylight. My idea was that if any wind sprang up, we should drift away from the ship and have a job to get back again.
You say you got into this boat and it was lowered and you were told to go...
To stand by the after gangway.
Did you do it?
I did it as near as possible. I kept within a safe distance of the ship, if anything did happen.
You kept far enough away so that if anything happened, you would not be involved in it. Is that the idea?
Exactly.
What did you expect to happen?
I thought she still had about 3 of the compartments and still would remain afloat.
And if she did not float and went down, you were expecting a suction that would draw the lifeboats down.
Well, yes. I thought we might get into a bit of a wash.
This man saw the ice on the well deck, saw water in the forward hatch. He heard from firemen that their quarters were flooding. He heard from Boxall that the post office was flooding. And he was told by essentially the CEO of his company that they didn't have time to waste. Yet he remains confident in the work of Harland and Wolff. He was less worried about the ship sinking than he was about the struggle of getting back to Titanic in the morning if the wind sprang up. Also, I have to point out at this point one of the many frustrations of this sinking. He was ordered, as were others, to hang around the gangways so more passengers could be loaded, much like he just told us was a smarter way of loading a lifeboat than from up on the boat deck. But like everyone else, he instead keeps his distance. God forbid their boat gets swamped. Despite many boats being told to hang around the gangways to take on more passengers, not a single passenger was saved from Titanic this way. And so Pitman navigates his lifeboat away from Titanic, as does the only other lifeboat currently launched. Did you ever see number 7 after it struck the water?
Yes, I had it made fast to me. As there was no officer on the boat, I said, "Look here, make fast to me, and we will hang on until daylight, as it is smooth water, and at daylight we will set our sails, and we will be more likely to be picked up if we are together than if one of us is over there and one over here."
So with lifeboats 5 and 7 tied together and a safe distance from the ship, all that remained was to watch. He just told us that it took about an hour in the lifeboat for him to realize that she would go. This next bit of testimony comes from about 30 minutes after that realization. Did you see the Titanic go down?
Yes, sir.
Describe, if you can, how she sank.
Judging by what I could see from a distance, she gradually disappeared until the forecastle head was submerged to the bridge. Then she turned right on end and went down perpendicularly.
This brings us to the big question we ask all our witnesses, the biggest yes or no question of the disaster. Did the ship break in two or sink intact? We know the answer, thanks to the discovery of the wreck in 2 pieces, but in 1912, survivors are quite split on the issue. So using his U.S. and U.K. testimony, let's get Third Officer Pitman's expert opinion, starting with the U.S. Did she seem to be broken in two?
Oh, no.
And now the UK. Did her afterpart ever right itself?
I should not think so. I did not see it.
Could you have seen it if it had happened?
I think so. I was only barely 100 yards away.
Were you keeping your eyes upon her?
I was.
Did she crack in the middle?
I do not think so. If the afterpart had broken off, it would have remained afloat.
Another high-ranking officer of Titanic, fully confident the ship sank intact. More survivors will say she broke in two than she sank intact, but the words of Lightoller and Pitman are going to carry more weight than they apparently should. Though somewhat unique to Pitman's testimony was that last answer. He honestly believes that if the ship did break in two, it would have actually saved the ship. The stern would have remained afloat independently. There are survivors who have this feeling as well, but it's usually people saying they saw the ship break in two who say this. They saw the ship break in two, and because the stern had sort of righted itself, they felt for a moment that the sinking is over, that the bow, now free to sink on its own, will go to the bottom of the ocean, and the stern can stay afloat. So Pitman kind of has that belief, but he doesn't see the ship break in two. He just thinks that that's what would happen. It's really fascinating. So Pitman says he did not witness the ship break in two, or at least he didn't see it. Did you hear any explosions?
Yes, 4 reports.
What kind of reports?
They sounded like the reports of a big gun in the distance.
What did you assume they were?
I assumed it was the bulkheads going myself.
Did you hear anything like boiler explosions?
Yes, I heard a lot of people say that, but I have my doubts about that. I do not see why the boilers should burst because there was no steam there. They should have been stopped about 2 hours and a half. The fires had not been fed, so there was very little steam there.
How long before going down were the explosions or noises?
Not until she was submerged.
Not until she was entirely submerged.
Yes.
The 4 mysterious explosions. You'll hear about these from many witnesses, they just won't agree on how many there were. Pitman says they all took place after the ship was gone, and that it couldn't have been the boilers, as so many passengers were assuming. As a member of the crew, he knew this could not have been the case because the steam was released through the valves at the tops of the funnels, creating that deafening roar as lifeboats were loading. You remember. We also have seen the boilers on the wreck, and the ones that are visible, none are exploded. So he slightly more accurately assumes those explosions were the bulkheads going. In the UK testimony, he goes into a bit more detail on why that would be such a loud noise. What did you estimate they were?
Boilers leaving the bed plates and crashing through the bulkheads.
Now, as creative as this image is of boilers smashing through bulkheads, modern research suggests that these sounds were not explosions of boilers or internal bulkheads going, but it's actually the sounds of the ship itself splitting in two. The lights had gone out, pitching everyone into complete darkness, and these explosions, some possibly coming from underwater, some from above, were actually the sounds of the whole structure failing in a very violent way. We can't say any of this 100% for sure, but it is worth mentioning that other ships have sunk and split in two in some way, and survivors of those sinkings describe a very similar sound of like a cannon explosion. So it's quite likely that that's what this was. So Pitman is correct. He didn't see the ship split in two, but it seems to me at least that he absolutely heard it split in two. Now, something researchers have to love Pitman for is actually the most mundane part of this testimony. As with any aspect of the sinking, timings are all over the place. One person might say that something happened at 12:45 a.m. We don't know if they're guessing, if they're rounding down from 12:48, rounding up from 12:43, if their watch was even set to the right time, and worst of all, Titanic was set to change her clocks at midnight. as they did as they crossed time zones, crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Did they adjust? Does the witness know that they did not adjust? Well, Pitman here is about to tell us the exact time that Titanic went under. What a valuable time for us to know. And thankfully, he's even asked for the minute details of that time, and he does so with a little sense of humor. Can you fix the exact moment of time when the Titanic disappeared?
2:20 exactly, ship's time. I took my watch out at the time she disappeared, and I said, "It is 2:20, and the passengers around me heard it."
2:20 a.m.
2:20 a.m., the 15th of April.
You gave me ship's time?
Yes, that is ship's time.
When were the ship's clocks set, do you know?
They are set at midnight every night.
And were they set at midnight Sunday night?
No, we had something else to think of.
Exactly, so that you got the ship's time.
Ship's time.
From midnight Saturday.
Yes.
And your watch
Was correct.
We love the specificity, don't we, folks? It's as if Senator Smith and Officer Pitman know that 100 years from now, people are going to argue over the exact timings of things on a little site called Reddit. So Titanic is gone. Pitman commands one of about 17-ish lifeboats that have empty seats and the ability to return for more survivors, so you know we have to ask him, why didn't you go back?
As soon as she disappeared, I said, "Now, men, we will pull toward the wreck." Everyone in my boat said it was a mad idea because we had far better save what few we had in my boat than go back to the scene of the wreck and be swamped by the crowds that were there.
As a matter of fact, do you not know your boat would have accommodated 20 or 25 more people?
My boat would have accommodated a few more, yes, certainly.
Who demurred to that?
The whole crowd in my boat. A great number of them did.
I ask you if any women in your boat appealed to you to return to the direction from which the cries came.
No one.
You say that no woman passenger in your boat urged you to return.
None.
As Walter Lord writes beautifully in A Night to Remember, in boat after boat, the story was the same. A timid suggestion, a stronger refusal, nothing done. We now move on to the hardest part of Pitman's testimony, the hardest part for us to read, of course, but as you will see, the hardest part for him to give. Did you hear any cries of distress?
Oh, yes.
What were they? Cries for help?
Crying, shouting, moaning.
From the ship or from the water?
From the water, after the ship disappeared. No noises before.
There were no noises from the ship's crew or officers or passengers just preceding the sinking?
None.
How many of these cries were there? Was it a chorus or was
I would rather you not speak about that.
I would like to know how you were impressed by it.
Well, I cannot very well describe it. I would rather you not speak of it.
I realize that it is not a pleasant theme, and yet I would like to know whether these cries were general and in chorus, or desultory and occasional.
There was a continuous moan for about an hour.
And you lay in the vicinity of that scene for about an hour?
Oh, yes. We were in the vicinity of the wreck the whole time.
And drifted, or lay on your oars during that time?
We drifted toward daylight as a little breeze sprang up.
Did this anguish, or these cries of distress, die away?
Yes. They died away gradually.
Did they continue during most of the hour?
Oh, yes. I think so. It may have been a shorter time. Of course, I did not watch every 5 minutes.
I understand that. I'm not trying to ask about a question of 5 minutes. Is that all you care to say?
I would rather that you would have left that out altogether.
It's very rare that a witness tries to avoid a topic altogether. I think this goes a long way to showing us the kind of person Pitman was, and maybe the struggles that he would carry with him for some time to come. He also mentions that the screams didn't begin until the ship was gone, essentially, that there were no noises before then. So you can add Pitman to the long list of survivors who insist that panic and screaming that one might expect, that didn't really exist until the very end. Now, is that due to 1912 bravery that doesn't exist anymore? Is it due to the ignorance of what is to come? Is it just that people have no idea how cold that water is about to be? Avid listeners, you know how I feel. Well, before we wrap up this two-parter, we have one last topic to cover with the third officer. As the second boat launched from the ship, Pitman and boat number 5 would have been in the open ocean longer than most. And like every boat, they would witness one of the most beautiful sunrises that one could possibly imagine. Titanic, once again, being terribly poetic. But Pitman took note of the more sinister side of what was seen that morning. Did you see any ice there Sunday?
I saw none, sir, up until Monday morning.
How much ice did you see then?
There were numerous bergs around me, maybe half a dozen, but I was not sufficiently interested to count them.
Were these bergs high above the water?
Somewhere.
How high?
Some may have been 100 feet, or 150 feet.
150 feet above the water would make the icebergs Titanic was attempting to avoid twice the height of the ship's boat deck, and considering all the ice underwater, twice the length of Titanic's hull. Next time you stand next to a 12 to 15-story building, remember that that is the height of these icebergs above the water, according to Pitman. Titanic was an incredibly powerful ship. These icebergs, clearly, were incredibly powerful forces of nature. And after joining me for these last 2 episodes, I hope you can now say Pitman's testimony, though not as often reprinted, is as powerful as any. Saying goodbye to Murdoch, his lifeboat, not wanting to go back, the screams that he clearly has trouble speaking about. He witnessed more than anyone would ever want, so I appreciate him joining us to share those experiences one last time. And folks, if you want to hear just a little more from Pitman, I've set aside some bonus testimony where he covers the mystery ship and the validity of hitting the iceberg head-on. This testimony will be available for Witness Titanic patrons over on patreon.com/Witness Titanic. Next time, we speak with a modern witness. She's a historian, but a historian of a very different kind than we are used to. I'm very excited for you all to hear her testimony. Till then, I'm your chairman, James Penca. I'm thrilled to have you all back for another season. Be kind to each other, Titanic community. I will see you next time on Witness Titanic.